Sophie Bennett sighed, adjusting the apron on her uniform one last time before stepping out of the airport cafe. Today wasn't just another workday. She was here for something much more important. Her brother, Daniel, was finally coming home. Life had never been easy for Sophie. After their parents passed away, Daniel had no choice but to move to another city for work, hoping to send money back for Sophie and Lucas, their younger brother, who was still in school. But life had its own plans. The money Daniel sent was never enough, and Sophie had been working tirelessly to keep their little family afloat. But today, for the first time in a long while, she had something to look forward to. Daniel had texted her the night before, saying he had finally booked a flight home. She had been waiting for this moment for years. The airport arrivals area was packed with people. Sophie stood on her tiptoes, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. Then, she spotted him. A tall figure with neatly styled dark hair, standing with his back to her. Her heart raced. "It's him!" Without another thought, she rushed forward, weaving through the sea of people. When she reached him, she threw her arms around him, hugging him as tightly as she could. "You're finally home! I missed you so much!" she cried out, her voice thick with emotion. But the second she touched him, something felt wrong. His shoulders, too firm. His scent, too sophisticated. His suit, far too expensive. A wave of panic washed over her. Slowly, Sophie lifted her head, and her breath caught in her throat. The man she had just hugged wasn't Daniel. He was a complete stranger. And not just any stranger. He was too handsome to be real. For half a second of awkward silence, Sophie felt like the entire airport had disappeared. It was just her, and the stranger she had just thrown herself at, in front of hundreds of people. He didn't say anything immediately. He just looked at her, his stormy gray eyes cold, yet somehow amused. "Well, that was unexpected." His deep voice held a hint of dry humor. Sophie stumbled back in pure panic, nearly tripping over someone's suitcase. I hugged the wrong person. I'm so sorry." She threw up her hands like she was surrendering. The man folded his arms, his lips twitching slightly. "I figured." Sophie wanted to vanish into thin air. "I thought you were my brother. He's tall, dark-haired, and I just saw the reflection in the glass. I didn't look properly." She started rambling, waving her hands frantically to explain. The man raised an eyebrow. "Ah, emotional nearsightedness?" Sophie blinked. "What?" He tilted his head slightly. "You saw what you wanted to see, instead of what was actually there." Sophie's jaw dropped open, then quickly snapped shut. "I do not have time to debate psychology with a stranger. I need to find my brother." She spun on her heel, cheeks burning. Right at that moment, her phone vibrated. Sophie glanced at the screen. A message from Daniel. "Hey, sis, I'm really sorry, but I can't come home. The ticket was too expensive. I'll visit next year instead." Sophie froze. The entire airport blurred into the background. She had been waiting for this moment for years, only to be met with a short text and a crushing sense of disappointment. Her heart sank, but before she could even process the heartbreak, a shadow loomed beside her. "Are you okay?" Sophie looked up. It was him again. She blinked, quickly masking her emotions. "I'm fine." He studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to believe her. Then, with a half smirk, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Sophie exhaled sharply, shaking her head, trying to forget the humiliating disaster of her day. But what she didn't know was that fate wasn't done with him yet. Ever since Sophie had accidentally hugged Adrian at the airport, things had become strange. Not because she got into trouble, but because that man kept showing up. The very next morning, as she rushed through her shift, she looked up and saw Adrian Carter sitting at a corner table in the cafe. What was he doing here? Sophie ignored him, but every time she turned around, he was still there, casually sipping his coffee, his stormy gray eyes scanning the place. Day 2, Day 3, and Day 4, every morning Adrian showed up, and he always chose the same table. Sophie pretended not to care, but her coworkers certainly noticed. "Have you realized," Lily, her friend, whispered, "he always sits at table 7, and he only lets you serve him." Sophie paused for a second. That was true. Whenever she was busy with another table, Adrian waited patiently, never calling for another server. Weird. Really weird. By the 5th day, Sophie couldn't take it anymore. She placed his coffee down and, instead of leaving, crossed her arms and stared him down. "Did you lose your memory or something?" she asked sarcastically. "The airport is just a few blocks away. No need to relive the moment." Adrian smirked, stirring his coffee lazily. "The coffee here is good." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Really? Or are you just here to mess with me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his gaze, his piercing gray eyes studying her carefully. "Maybe both." Sophie was caught off guard by his honesty, but before she could react, her phone buzzed, a message from the hospital. She glanced at the screen, and her stomach dropped. Lucas's medical bill was due. She exhaled sharply, but Adrian saw everything. He set his cup down, his voice steady and firm. "You need money, don't you?" Adrian's voice was calm, but there was something unreadable in his gaze. Sophie stiffened. "I've been watching you these past few days." He set his cup down, his tone unwavering. "You work long hours, you barely take breaks, and every time your phone buzzes, you tense up. I have a proposal. Be my personal chef for 1 week. 3 meals a day. I'll pay you enough to cover your brother's medical expenses." Sophie stared at him, completely stunned. "Have you been stalking me?" Adrian remained calm. "No, I'm just very observant." Sophie bit her lip, her entire body tense. Every instinct told her to refuse, but Lucas, she had no other choice. At last, Sophie sighed, meeting his gaze. "Fine, I'll do it." Adrian smirked, as if he already knew her answer. "Good. See you tomorrow." Sophie stood in front of the towering skyscraper, tilting her head back to take it all in. "Am I really doing this?" Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the massive glass doors. Immediately, a polite receptionist escorted her to a private elevator, where there was only one button, the top floor. As the elevator doors slid open, Sophie stepped into a penthouse, so luxurious it almost didn't feel real. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows framed a breathtaking view of the glittering city. The decor was sleek and modern, dominated by deep black and cool gray tones. In the center of the room, Adrian Carter sat casually on a plush leather sofa, one hand holding a wine glass, the other flipping through a book. He looked up as she entered, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Welcome." Sophie tightened her grip on her bag, forcing herself to stay composed. "Where's the kitchen?" Adrian chuckled softly, then gestured toward the left. Sophie walked in, and her jaw dropped. This wasn't just a kitchen, it was a work of art. So sleek, so high-tech, it felt more like a display than a functional space. She turned to Adrian, skeptical. "Have you ever actually used this kitchen?" Adrian sipped his wine lazily, then replied with an infuriatingly calm tone. "I've walked past it a few times." Sophie shook her head, deciding she had to get used to his ridiculousness. The first day, she focused only on cooking, preparing meals, cleaning up, and keeping her interactions with Adrian to a bare minimum. But he had other plans. He kept showing up in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching her cook like it was his new favorite pastime. By the 3rd day, Sophie couldn't take it anymore. "Do you not have a job?" she asked, narrowing her eyes as he sat on a stool, sipping his coffee, eyes fixed on her. Adrian shrugged nonchalantly. "I like watching you work." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You've never seen someone cook before?" Adrian set his coffee down, resting his chin on his hand as he studied her. I've just never seen someone look this adorable while being so focused." Sophie froze, nearly dropping the knife in her hand. Did he just? Her face heated instantly. She whipped around, muttering something about needing to concentrate on the food. But her heartbeat? A total mess. As much as she didn't want to admit it, Sophie knew she was starting to see Adrian Carter differently. That evening, as Sophie cleaned up after dinner, she noticed a neatly placed box on the kitchen counter. "What's this?" she asked, glancing at Adrian, who sat casually sipping his wine. He barely looked up, speaking as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "A dress." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "I have eyes. I can see it's a dress. The real question is, why is it here?" Adrian set his glass down, leaning back with an unreadable expression. "I have a charity gala tomorrow night, and I want you to come with me." Sophie let out a short laugh, thinking he was joking, but when she saw the serious look in his eyes, she froze. "You're serious?" Adrian nodded. "I don't ask twice." Sophie bit her lip, uncertainty creeping in. She didn't belong in places like that, and yet, some part of her wanted to go. After a long pause, she sighed, crossing her arms. "Fine, but just so you know, I'm not like the women you usually bring to these things." Adrian smirked, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "I know." The next night, as Sophie stepped into the grand ballroom, all eyes turned toward her. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, but just as she felt the urge to run, a warm hand took hers. "Relax." Adrian's voice was low against her ear. "You look stunning." Sophie blushed, but she kept her composure. The night passed in a blur, but the biggest surprise came when Adrian led her onto the dance floor. "I don't know how to dance," Sophie whispered, glancing nervously at the crowd. Adrian smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Just trust me." She hesitated, but then his arm wrapped securely around her waist, his other hand warm against hers. The moment he took the first step, Sophie felt something shift inside her. The music faded into the background. The crowd disappeared. It was just the two of them. He moved with such ease, leading her as if they had done this 1,000 times before, and for the first time, Sophie let go. She wasn't sure if it was the soft lights, the elegant music, or the way Adrian's gaze held hers, but she felt safe. For the first time, she let herself stop thinking and just feel. After the gala, Adrian didn't take Sophie home right away. Instead, he drove through the glowing city streets before stopping in front of a towering skyscraper. Sophie frowned, looking up before turning to him. "What are we doing here?" Adrian simply smirked mysteriously. "Come with me. I want to show you something." They took the elevator to the very top, stepping out onto a vast rooftop terrace. The cool night breeze played with Sophie's hair, and in front of her was the most breathtaking cityscape she had ever seen. Skyscrapers stretched into the sky, roads shimmered with golden lights. It was like a masterpiece painted by the night. "It's beautiful," Sophie whispered, mesmerized. Adrian stood beside her, gazing at the view. "This is where I come when I feel lost." Sophie turned to him, surprised by his honesty. "You? Lost?" Adrian let out a soft chuckle, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "You think being a billionaire means you never feel lonely?" He exhaled deeply, then said quietly, "Ever since I was a child, I've been surrounded by people who only cared about money. They never saw me. They only saw the title, Adrian Carter. No one ever really cared who I was." Sophie stilled. She had never imagined that someone like Adrian, someone who seemingly had everything, could feel so empty inside. He turned to her, his gaze dark and intense. "But when I met you," his voice softened, raw with emotion, "you didn't see me as Adrian Carter the billionaire. You saw me as a person." Sophie's heart pounded against her ribs. Adrian stepped closer, taking her hands gently. "You pulled me out of the loneliness I've known for years." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind and their quiet breaths. Finally, Adrian murmured, "I don't want to just be a week-long amusement to you. I want more." He squeezed her hand slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sophie, you've changed everything for me. Before I met you, I thought I had everything, but now I realize I had nothing, because none of it mattered." Adrian's voice was steady, but there was something raw and vulnerable beneath it. "I don't want this to be just a fleeting moment. I don't want to go back to my life before you." He took a deep breath. "I want you. Not for a week, not for a season, but for as long as you'll have me." Sophie's heart pounded. She had never been someone's first choice. She had always been the one left behind. But looking into Adrian's stormy gray eyes, she saw something she had never seen before. Certainty, devotion, love. Slowly she smiled. "Then I guess you're stuck with me." And as Adrian closed the distance between them, pressing his lips softly against hers, Sophie knew she had made the right choice. Their first kiss, under the glowing city lights, was the only answer needed. Sophie and Adrian's love wasn't a picture-perfect fairy tale. It was full of sweet moments, but also plenty of hilarious mishaps, like the first time Sophie stayed over at Adrian's apartment. The next morning, she woke up in unfamiliar pajamas, panicked, and rushed into the living room, only to find Adrian casually reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee. When did I change clothes?" Sophie stammered, her face turning red. Adrian folded his newspaper slowly, looking at her with pure amusement. "Do you think I helped?" He smirked. "I wouldn't dare. You did it yourself." Sophie turned bright red, grabbing a sofa pillow and throwing it at him, making Adrian burst into laughter. Or the time Sophie tried to cook a romantic dinner and nearly burned down the kitchen. "Adrian, help me!" Sophie shrieked, desperately trying to put out the flames in the pan. Adrian strolled into the kitchen, arms crossed, as if he were watching a comedy show. "So this is how you plan to kill me?" he teased, before calmly grabbing the fire extinguisher. Still, their love only grew stronger. Lucas had fully recovered, healthy and happier than ever. Sophie still worked at the cafe, but now she had a man who patiently waited for her every night. And then, a year later, Adrian brought Sophie back to the rooftop where they had shared their first kiss, the place where he first confessed his feelings. The wind played through her hair as Adrian knelt before her, opening a small velvet box. "Sophie, from the moment you hugged the wrong man at the airport, I knew you were the only one who could turn my world upside down." His voice was warm, steady, full of love. "Marry me." Sophie laughed, her eyes shimmering with happy tears. "I have no reason to say no." She nodded, and Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a deep kiss under the city lights. 1 month later, the wedding took place. The venue overflowed with fresh flowers, just like Sophie had always dreamed of. But the biggest surprise came when the chapel doors opened and Daniel, her brother, stood there, holding out his hand. "I promised I'd walk you down the aisle, didn't I?" He smiled, his eyes slightly red. Sophie choked back a sob, squeezing his hand tightly. As she walked toward Adrian, standing at the altar amidst a pathway of blooming roses, she knew she had found her forever. The wedding ended with a breathtaking kiss, surrounded by cheers and the ringing of wedding bells. And so, their happily ever after began.